Hey everyone, Lauren from A Girl and Her Wool here. So today we're going to be continuing a business series that I started here on my channel. I actually started it back in November before Vlogmas, but I'm kind of doing this business series every other Tuesday opposing the Die With Me vlogs. So I will link to the previous videos in the series down in the description box if you want to get caught up, but I will do a little refresher that in the first video I talked about why I wanted to start a hand-dyed yarn business, and then in the second one I talked about how I started it, and so I went into a little bit about what I was doing kind of early on. And the main idea of this series is really just to reflect back on the early years before I kind of forget, and I hope to revisit these topics kind of over time and just kind of be able to look back on how my business has changed and how my perspective within it has changed. And so I figured it's just fun to share and show you guys kind of more of things on this side of a hand-dyed yarn business. And so today we're going to be talking about, I'm calling it what I wish I knew. Some of these things are going to be things that I did know and I just for one reason or another didn't prioritize it. Just things that really the main idea of this is going to be decisions that I made or decisions that I should have made and lessons learned along the way, I guess. So I'm calling it what I wish I knew, but it's a little bit, that's kind of like a general title. So yeah, so I as a recap, I started my hand-dyed yarn business. I launched it in May of 2019, and so I'm coming up kind of on 2 years, and so I thought it was a good time to just look back and reflect. There were a lot of decisions I made early on in my business that I don't necessarily still make today, and then there are things that I have done since then that I'm happy I've changed, and so I just wanted to talk about that. But first I'm going to talk about kind of some things, really trying to literally take this into kind of what I wish I knew going into this. Not necessarily all like mistakes or anything, just things that I didn't realize were going to be as big as they are now. So I think the first part of that has to be social media. So personally, I'm not a big social media person. I don't have a personal Instagram account, and I didn't have an Instagram account at all until just a couple of years ago. I would say a couple of years before I started this business, and that was really because to participate in knit-alongs and things like that, I needed an Instagram. I didn't realize how big the knitting community was on Instagram, and this is not when I started my business. This is a couple of years before that. And so when I realized like again, I never used Instagram, and so when I realized like what it was and what people did with it, I was like, oh, so-and-so is on Instagram. Oh, look, here's that person, here's that person, here's that person. And everyone was there and everyone uses it in the fiber community. And so it was fun to like learn that and see that. But again, even on like Facebook, I'm not big on posting on Facebook. I joined Facebook when it was the Facebook. This was back when Zuckerberg first launched it, and it was just open to colleges, and even then I didn't sign up for it right when I first could have. I think it was like the end of my first semester in college where people were like, you have to get on Facebook, the Facebook. And so it's just, social media is not a big thing for me. Doing a YouTube channel like this is not something I ever would have done. I say it often, but I do a lot of things for this business that surprise me and that I really never would have thought I would have done. And so putting myself out there on the internet is just not something that I do. And even if you do follow me on Instagram or even here on my channel, you probably notice there's not too much personal stuff on there. It's really about the crafts and the business, and a lot of that is just where my comfort level is. I don't turn to social media as an outlet for emotions and things like that. I never have, and that's just something that it's just not a big part of me. My family too, just not really big social media users. And so I think social media is a great tool for businesses though, and so it was something that I had to learn and kind of tell myself to really put myself out there more. And so in some ways it's like good and bad as a what I wish I knew type of thing, because I think if I knew how much I'd have to put myself like as a person out there, it probably would have scared me a lot more than just having to do it in the moment. And so that's kind of the first thing is I'm calling it what I wish I knew, and then I say I don't know if I actually wish I knew it, but that's just kind of the general idea is like I didn't realize like how big social media is for business, which is probably really naive thinking, but it's not just even putting your business on social media. People like to invest in the person, and if they like you and they like following you as a person, that helps you and your business. And so it's not just about like the pretty yarn and the pretty yarn pictures. It's also like people like to invest in a person. And so that's like a big thing that I am still continuing to work on, still trying to put myself out there as kind of like a human more so than like a girl in her wool. So that is something that, again, just like reflecting on these early years is something that I didn't really do and I'm still learning how to do. I don't think I'm very good at social media. I don't think I'm good at doing all of those things. And so it's just something that I'm always working on, and going back to kind of my 2021 goals of, trying to get ahead and plan ahead. I find that if I can plan social media posts and like plan them out, I get more comfortable around what I'm posting versus if I try to do it in the moment, I get like very self-conscious and all of that stuff. So that is something, just one of those things like I didn't necessarily realize would be as big as it is for a business. So along with that, the second thing is really how important collaborations and networking is. So not only do you have to put yourself out there and just, post photos and post blogs that are about you and hope that people like it, you also need to connect and build relationships and put yourself out there kind of individually to someone and really lay yourself out there. And that's something, again, that it's a big part of having a business, especially as one person business. But it's something that's so important and it's so rewarding. Like it's always one of those things where it's like, for me, it's like working out, right? You dread it up until the time you have to do it, and then it feels so good after. That's the same way with building relationships. It can be so hard and so nerve-wracking to put yourself out there, but then it's like it's so rewarding when you do build connections and make friends out there. So that's something that, again, probably would have terrified me if I thought about it more from the beginning, but it's something that, again, it's something that I'm continuing to work on, continuing on learning how to put myself out there and to just go for it. Especially like I don't have to cold call people. Like it's emails or it's liking photos or commenting or things like that are just really easy, right? I do it from the comfort of my home. You don't have to kind of like cold call and like force yourself into situations. You kind of can just send an email, and that's putting yourself out there. So it really shouldn't be as hard as sometimes it feels like it is, but it's one of those things that definitely is such a big part of it, and also something that I'm still working on. Okay, and so from a yarn perspective, and then I'll kind of get a little bit more specific with some of these, but this one will be a little bit more specific. So from a yarn related, right? So those are kind of social media, collaborations, networking. Those are all things that can apply like to any business. So what are things about like having a hand-dyed yarn business? People really like to see things in action a little bit. So something that I mean, I knew going into it that people like to see swatches. They like to see how things are knit up. But what's hard when you're first starting is your inventory is low. You don't necessarily have as much capital. You don't have as much inventory to necessarily like use up on things. And I'm gonna tie this into something else in a little bit. But it's one thing that I really learned kind of early on that I'm still trying. Again, all these things are still growing, on is that people really like to see swatches. They really want to see how yarn is going to get knit up, which I think is really nice. And I'm a planner too, so I feel exactly the same way. There are a lot of things that with hand-dyed yarn that I would see a skein and I would say that looks really pretty, but I'm not sure how it would knit up. And if you haven't checked out my pooling versus non-pooling, which is my most recent dye with me video, go check that out, because I kind of talk about that a little bit, in that when you see a pooling skein, they can look really pretty in the skein because you see all the unique colors. But once you knit it up, they don't necessarily all blend together, and so it doesn't make like a uniform skein. Whereas when you see a skein that is more uniform and will knit up more uniformly, or a skein, if I said that wrong, the skein itself is like also more blended. And so if you see the two next to each other, you might be leaning more towards like a brighter, you know, I see like the bright blues, the bright greens, but then when I see it in a more blended up skein, you don't necessarily see the bright colors stick out as much. And so it's an interesting conundrum. And then something that I always thought about was how like yarn dyers aren't selling knitted or crafted items, they're selling yarn. And so their goal is to make a beautiful skein of yarn that someone will want to buy. But in my shop, I've always tried to think about like what people actually want to work with. And so that's why a lot of my shop are kind of the more blended uniform skeins, tonals and things like that. Or if you do get speckled, they're kind of like evenly speckled throughout, because I do know that people want to know what it's going to look like and have a good project in the end. And so swatches are important. It's something that I did at the beginning when I had some more time. So I would knit swatches of all of my colorways, and it's something that kind of fell off the radar that is really important. I'm getting a lot more and more questions of, you know, do I have swatches of new colors? And so it's something that I need to get back to, and, you know, kind of knowing that that is really important to people. So then along the same lines, swatches are good, but people like kits. I find that people really enjoy having colors that are paired together. So for a lot of my recent colorways, if they are variegated skeins, I've been creating a tonal that goes along with it. That's something that people have been asking for, and a lot of times even if they don't specifically say, oh, I like variegated with tonal, a lot of times I get, hey, what does this color like kind of go well with? And so that's something that, again, kind of new when I started. So the Wish I Knew title isn't necessarily the best, but something that I've kind of learned is like super important is having kits, and even not necessarily just saying here's a 2-color kit. It's here's a kit for the Stephen West Mystery Knit Along, or here's a kit for the Tammy Gore Mystery Knit Along, or here's a kit for the Amba O'Brien Radvent Wrap. It's nice to have specific kits for specific patterns. And if you did watch my 2021 goals, you saw that that's one of my goals for 2021 is to build more of those for my shop. So that's something that I'm still growing with. And then the kind of last yarn related wish I knew is probably one that is a genuine wish I knew, is that it's important to keep up with upcoming patterns. So again, when the Stephen West Mystery Knit Along was coming out, I created a kit for myself that I was going to use, and I put it up in the shop. And doing things like that is really good. Having the Radvent patterns ready. I mean, those, it was different because it was a collaboration, but just having the kits ready to go like as patterns come out. And so signing up to be like a test knitter, or at least be on the test knitter email list for designers, is really great, because then you can see what patterns are coming up in terms of like creating kits. So like you don't necessarily get the patterns, but you can see like, oh, they're looking for, you know, a 3-colored shawl that uses this amount of yarn type of thing. So that's something that is a genuine like wish I had done sooner, was to just sign up to be like test knitters. a test knitter for different designers. That way I can kind of get an idea of kits, so that way when they do launch their new patterns, I have kits ready to go. So another thing that kind of talked generally and then talked about the yarn stuff. So I'm going to talk like really about the business side. So one thing that is, you know, you hear a lot of people talk about is like reinvesting in their business. So when I started a business, I reinvested every dollar back into the business. And while that made sense to me, I work in finance, I'm a financial person, that all made sense to me. I didn't necessarily think about how to apply it. And so for me, when I first started, and I'm going to talk about my initial goals for the business in a little bit, but one of my goals when I was first starting, so when I first started, starting business takes money, and so I use personal finances for it. So my husband and I kind of talked about an amount of money that we were reasonable with me spending, and that's what I started with. And so my goal was to pay us back as soon as possible. That was my business financial goal, was to basically get out of debt and pay us back as soon as possible. I felt guilty that I had taken kind of money from our personal finances for this. And so it's hard though, because yes, when I sell yarn, I profit off of it. So yes, I can use that profit to help pay us back, and then the money of the cost of the business could go back into it. That was kind of like a philosophy that I had, was just trying to pay us back as soon as possible. The problem with that is that it's hard to grow a business that way. So if you're just kind of putting the cost back into your business and not the profit, then you'll never be able to grow. So what ended up happening was I was paying us back slowly, but then I would have to borrow from us again to grow. So when I knew I was going to be doing a trunk show, I had to buy more stock up front so that I would have a lot available to show during the trunk show, or just things like that. I needed to get myself a computer, and my business didn't have all the money to save up for it. So it was should I save up for it, or should we just add it to the tab and get it now? So there were things like that that I had to do over time. And I think that it's important. What I wish I knew was that, like, really for a long time, I would be investing back into the business without necessarily paying us back, which is fine. I have a full-time job. My husband has his full-time job. And so while I was working, and I still am working on my full-time job, I have the luxury of investing the money from my business back into it. And I have since paid us back every penny. The business now fully sustains itself, and so I don't have to worry about that anymore. But just like something that I wish I knew was that while it takes patience to grow a business, it also would take patience to kind of have it be in the green, essentially. So just kind of on the business side, not talking about the finances too much, but just what I wish I knew is that yes, it takes patience to grow a business and grow a following and have kind of regular sales, but it also takes time to get the business financially sound as well. And so that's kind of one thing there. So what was I reinvesting in my business? So this was something that, again, was hard for me to do because I am not a spender. My husband's not a spender. And so again, I was saying that I felt guilty that I took money kind of out of our personal finances. So along with that is that it was hard for me to spend money on my business that wasn't the bare necessities. I was fine with spending money on the yarn that I needed, but even that I would essentially buy like the minimum I needed to do, right? Like spending money out of the business, especially while I was trying to pay us back, was really hard for me to do. And I especially didn't want to buy anything that was not a necessity. So anything that was not like yarn, citric acid, dyes, shipping envelopes, things like that, like the actual bare necessities to actually physically dye yarn and ship it to people, I did not spend money on until I didn't want to do that until the business could buy it, right? I mean, and that makes sense, right? The business should save up for things that it needed. But the problem is that as one person who also has a full-time job, there's only so much I can do, and I needed to not be so hard on myself. It's important for me to spend money on things that are going to save me time, because right now, time is a resource that I don't have. I work, again, a full-time job. This is all done in my free time, and I'm fortunate enough right now that I'm not commuting, so that gives me 2+ hours a day to work on my business that I didn't have before. And honestly, more energy too. So things that okay, so we'll talk about kind of my first big purchase, which was my electronic skein winder. So you guys see that sometimes in the background. You see it in the day in the life vlogs, but what it is, it's electronic, and it has a switch that I turn on, and it creates skeins of yarn. So I buy my yarn on cones, and I wind them off into the any size skein. So I do that because I sell any size skein. So I can wind off 20 grams, 50 grams, 75 grams, 300 grams, whatever size you guys are buying, I wind it off of cones. And I was doing that at first with my regular old Swift, and I was physically going like this and winding it round and round like this, because it doesn't have a handle on it, and I was just going like this. Every single skein that was ordered, I was going like this, and that was a shoulder killer, and it was really time consuming. Now on my electronic skein winder, first of all, I'm not killing my shoulder. I can do 3 skeins at a time, and it goes much faster than I did with my hand because it is electronic. And that was a big purchase, and it took me, probably in the grand scheme of things, not that long to decide to get it. But first, again, I was doing the winding by hand, and then after that, I actually asked for like a Christmas or birthday gift to get one that had a handle, figuring that I could crank it, and then that would work. I'd still just be doing one at a time. I'd still be going through the motions of doing it myself, but that was a much cheaper option. It actually didn't work, and I returned it. So that didn't work. And so when that one didn't work, that was like my plan B. It was like, I have to get the electronic one. And then I upgraded it to get, to do 3 at a time. I was like, if I'm buying it, I'm going to spend the extra, whatever it was, $100 to then just, do 3 at a time. And that has been a lifesaver. I would not have been able to keep up with orders like I have been if I had that. Like doing the Radvent kits like would not have been possible if I was hand going like this for 24 skeins of 20 gram minis for one order. And so yes, I could also buy 20 gram minis. The distributor does sell them that way. That is more expensive, and taking that into account, I'll kind of come back to that in a minute, but I can't do that with 75 gram skeins. I can't do that with 300 gram skeins. So me winding off skeins is something that's a part of my business, and investing in that machinery was just so worth it. Another thing is my spin dryer. So if you guys saw my vlog where I dyed up the kits for the Radvent kits in a 5-day period, I did that. That was the hardest part of that, was getting the yarn dry. That was my biggest holdup of the weekend, and I talk about that in that vlog, and that was my breaking point. And it's funny because that isn't even that big of a purchase. Like, I don't mean in this video to come across like money is not an object. It is, trust me. Like I said, I'm not a big spender. It takes me a really long time to spend money. If you guys know me in person, that is very obvious. Money is more than certainly an object, and it's hard for me to spend money. And so even spending like $100 on the spin dryer was like a really big deal, and it has been a game changer. I can get yarn dyed, a mini especially, like dyed and dried in no time, which is really important because I do gradient sets, and even though I have formulas, there are times when two come out way too similar, where there's too big of a jump between them and I need to re-dye a mini. And I don't like that to hold up someone's order because of one mini. And so now I can just like quickly dye up the one skein and get it dry and out much quicker than it was. And like that to me is just such a game changer. And I don't get like a backlog of yarn having to dry. If I dye up a ton of yarn, it can still all like get dried. It's just so much better, and a really big thing. So all of this to say that one thing I wish I knew was just how spending money on to save you time, like it's so easy to be like, I don't need that, I can just do it myself, it's fine, like I don't need that. But it's so important to invest in yourself and your time. And it really took me kind of watching some other like Etsy sellers YouTube channels and people saying that, like saying these things of, you know, it's really important to spend money on like where your bottlenecks are and like what you're spending a lot of time on. If you can find something that helps you speed that up, it's like so worth it for your business. And it can be hard too, because me buying like a spin dryer or an electronic skein winder is something that doesn't necessarily like pay itself back. It doesn't necessarily mean too much for the business. It's not like investing in like, oh, I'm going to invest in having a new base and then maybe or a new product that like draws in new customers. It's like an investment that's just like me and my time and like my sanity, which I think will show through the business, but it's not like a straight dollar to dollar investment. And so that's where it can get hard. So anyway, that was a long rant about that, but that's like a huge what I wish I knew for this. And I know that it's less exciting because it is the more business side and less like the yarny side, but that's what this video is. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap this up pretty soon, but I just wanted to talk about a couple of like little more on the fun side that I thought would be fun to share. So one is just setting small milestones is fun, and this can be, it's good to have long-term goals, but I also really enjoyed that when I first started I had some small-term goals, and I wish I had kept up with that more. So my first milestone goal was to sell my yarn to a stranger. My second goal was to make back the money that that we put into it. So I think that's why I kind of got so caught up on paying us back as quickly as possible versus just like saying, hey, I'm going to take a few months to pay us back and like reinvest in our business instead. But my second goal was to pay us back. So essentially make the business zero, no red, no green, just kind of zero. Third milestone was to make $1 more than that. So sell to a stranger, break even, $1 more than break even. And then my last goal was to have the business sustain itself, or yes, to have the business kind of sustain itself. And then the last goal was to have it sustain my yarn buying. So that was my ultimate goal for starting my hand-dyed yarn business. Was I wanted a way to, again, it's hard for me to spend money, and it's really hard for me to spend money on myself. And so I felt guilty anytime I purchased yarn. And I'm not a big yarn spender. I've told you guys, I don't have a large yarn stash. I really buy for projects. And that's partially because I'm just not a big spender. I like to just plan out and get what I need and not have extra. You guys get the message. You've heard me say it a million times. And I wanted the business to be a way that basically the money I took in from the business would be the money that I was allowed to spend out on yarn. And so much of that has changed because one, when you grow a business, you need to put more into it. So to say I wanted to break even and then make $1 more than that, it doesn't happen that way, right? Like you grow, you know, things go up and down. So kind of had to change that philosophy. I kind of felt like I hit it and then didn't, and then hit it again and then didn't. So that was that. And then, you know, the business sustains itself now, so I have that. The yarn buying thing is, I guess you can call it that, I've hit that too, but changed. So I just don't buy yarn as much because my knitting time has turned into a yarn dyeing time, and when I do when I do knit, it's usually samples. So that kind of has changed, but yeah, I have to keep up with kind of setting these smaller milestones that I can hit along the way. Of course, I have long-term goals, but kind of setting little celebrations that I can have along the way is definitely like important. And then the last thing that is definitely what I wish I knew is that you're always gonna look backwards and say, what was I thinking? How many YouTube channels have you guys watched where the person says, if you want, you can go back and watch my early videos, but you really shouldn't. They're so bad, they're so embarrassing, right? Like, I think every channel I've watched has said that. There are YouTubers who will do videos of themselves of watching like their first video that they've ever posted on YouTube. Like, it's so normal to like be embarrassed about what you put up at first, and that applies to, you know, to the YouTube channel, to my business too. If you guys watched the how I started, I talked a lot about how I showed my colors on minis, and that just like wasn't gonna work. So there are always things that you're gonna do that you're always gonna look back on and say, what was I thinking? And just kind of the wish I knew was to just not worry about that at the beginning. I definitely think it's important to take it seriously, and you always want to put out something that you're proud of, but just because down the road you may have more time and resources to make what you're proud of better doesn't mean what like you're doing at the beginning isn't good. I certainly started off, it got me off the ground and I was fine, and so, you know, you can't worry about having being like number one on your first day, if that makes sense. So I had, when I started the blog, my husband said to me, like, you can't worry about this. You have to just write it and publish it. You can't spend a lot of time on it. Just write it and publish it. Like, don't worry about it. Like, don't even edit it. Just write it and publish it. And I think that that was like really good advice, because a lot of the things that are going to happen over time, like, you need to make mistakes along the way. You need to figure out what are things you like and things you don't like. So I guess expanding this, wish I knew, is that, you know, a lot of people will say you have to learn to say no. Like, you can't say yes to every opportunity. And I'm gonna kind of twist that a little bit. I think when you are a new business, you should say yes to everything, because those are the times to make mistakes. I remember my first week, my first months, you know, out of college, starting my job, and someone told me, like, this is a time to ask questions. Like, ask your stupid questions, or what you think are stupid questions, the basic questions now, because now is when we don't expect you to know anything. But if a year from now you're asking these questions, like, that's going to be a problem. And so taking that kind of into the business side, which is great advice, and it's the advice that I give. I work with like our I'm one of the first people at my department who like meets with new hires, and it's advice that I always give them, because people are always like, oh, I'm embarrassed to ask questions or whatever. I'm like, trust me, like, we expect you to know nothing. So ask your questions, because you don't want to ask them. Like, I basically just give the same advice back. And so I think with businesses, you have to say yes to opportunities that even if you're not sure about, because that's when you learn like what you're actually capable of and what you don't like. So for an example, I had a colorway called Pebbles in the River. Some of you who have been following me for more than a few months may remember it. It was a best-selling color. It was the bestseller. It was around before rose gold, so it was the first bestseller that I really had was Pebbles in the River. And that colorway was a disaster. It destroyed my pan. So whenever I dyed it, the pan that I used, I had to let it sit and soak in like soapy water, and I would change it out like a few times a day. It had to sit and soak for days before I could use that pan again. And when you're a new business and you don't have much capital and you don't want to be buying lots and lots of pots and pans that you don't need just because one colorway like destroyed your pan for a few days, it's hard. And it never dyed consistently. That colorway was so hard for me to gain consistency on, and so it would take until it dried the next day, because I didn't have my spin dryer, for me to see if it actually worked out okay and if I needed to fix it. Early on, that was something I could do because I didn't have as many orders, so I could focus on that. But as I got busier, I couldn't have a pan out of commission for a few days. I also couldn't have yarn that I needed to correct day after day. And so at first, I knew it was something I had to get rid of. I knew it was something I had to take off my shelf, but I couldn't say no to my bestseller. I couldn't say yes to retiring my best-selling colorway. And so I put up with it as long as I possibly could, and there got to be the breaking point where I finally said, like, I'm done with this colorway, it's retiring. And so I think that it was okay that I put up with it for as long as possible. I said yes to the colorway as long as I possibly could, and then I learned that I couldn't do it anymore. And since then, when I'm testing new colorways, I kind of, and you guys have seen me do a dye with me where I tested out a dye, and that's part of the reason is it's really important to know how dyes are gonna play and if it's gonna be consistent or if it's not, because it's okay to have an inconsistent like speckle that might react a little bit differently, but to have a base color of your yarn be inconsistent is just not a good thing. And especially on Etsy with reviews and everything, it's just really hard to take those risks. So, and online too, like people don't always trust the colors versus what they get in person. And so it was something that was a good decision to eventually take off my shelf, and I'm happy I did. But I think it was also valuable to like live through that experience of having like a difficult decision to make. And yeah, so I think that it's important at the beginning to say yes to things and to try things out, because at the beginning things are forgivable, especially when you don't have like a large following at the beginning. It's not that I'm saying like at the beginning I didn't put out a good product. I still worked really hard to put out a good product. If Pebbles in the River didn't come out right, sometimes I would just scratch the yarn and start fresh. And everything that I sent out I was proud of. It just might have taken me a few attempts to do it. But I think at the beginning you kind of learn the things that, you know, the mistakes that you're gonna make, you have like the time to kind of fix them. And so it's important to say yes at the beginning. And then as you get busier, it's easier to learn which opportunities you should and can say yes to, and you should and can say no to. And so kind of what I wish I knew at the beginning is, again, to just go for it, say yes, and then when the tough decisions had to be made, I could then go ahead and make them. So all that to say, at the beginning, you will look back and say, what was I thinking? But I think it's perfect to do the things that you question, what was I thinking, and learn from them and grow from them, and then change it for the better in the future. So this wraps up the vlog of kind of what I wish I knew and just reflecting on decisions I made, things I struggled with making decisions on really, and how I've changed it. In the next video, I'm going to kind of talk about what's up for the future, and I think that will wrap up this series. And I hope that it's been fun for you guys to watch, and it's been fun to share, and I really do hope to do similar videos like this over the years so that I can see how the business has changed and grown. So in the comments below, let me know things that you've done in the past that you've kind of learned from, or what's something that you had a what was I thinking kind of moment. I'd love to know. And this week on the channel, on Friday, you guys will see a finished object. I finally have another Faux Friday post to share with you guys, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And of course, next week we'll be back with another dye with me. So until then, make sure you Check me out on Instagram, A Girl in Her Wool. Remember, it's difficult for me to put myself out there on social media, but I'd love to have you along. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.